The Yidden are told they're going to be shechting the Korban Pesach on the 14th day of Nisan, but that they should take the sheep, they should prepare already 4 days in advance. On Yud Nisan is when they have to take the sheep. Now the question is why? This is not going to happen in future Korban Pesachs. Rashi brings, Hoyer Rab Masya ben Chorosh, Omer Rab Masya ben Chorosh would say that when Hashem came to redeem the Jewish people and he sees they're naked of mitzvahs, they don't have any mitzvahs with which to be redeemed, he gives them 2 mitzvahs to be involved with. Dam Pesach v'dam Milah, the blood of the Korban Pesach, and the blood of the Milah, which they are going to have that night. Now this is all very nice, but seemingly the question was not answered. So why do they have to do it 4 days in advance? Also, Rab Masya ben Chorosh was asking about why it's taking 4 days in advance. Why is he suddenly introducing the blood of the Milah, which seemingly was only going to happen on the night of the 15th? And how does that relate to his original question? And some other questions that the Rebbe addresses. And the Rebbe brings that some Mefarshim want to say that there's a connection over here between the blood of the Milah and why they're taking the sheep 4 days in advance. Because we know that after a child or after someone has a bris, for 3 days, he's still considered not well enough and not be able to travel. So before the Yidden take their journey, their trip out of Mitzrayim, they would have been having the bris a number of days in advance so they could heal for 3 days. And this is why they're also taking the Korban Pesach in advance. So they're taking the Korban Pesach on the 10th day of the month. And that night they're also going to have the bris. So these 2 mitzvahs can be done together. And then they're going to be able to wait the 3 days and finally be able to leave Mitzrayim after that. But the Rebbe says this is very difficult to say this in Rashi, because from Rashi it sounds like the Bris Milah was going to be on the night of the 15th day of Nisan, not on Yud Nisan, or the night after Yud Nisan. Rashi then goes on and says, the Yidden at that time were completely immersed in Avodah Zarah, so Hashem says to them, Mishchu kulachem tzoin, which implies that they should remove themselves from Avodah Zarah and instead to take a sheep, a lamb of mitzvah. Now these words are not part of the words of Rab Masya ben Chorosh. Rab Masya ben Chorosh says what he told us before in the Mechilta. Then comes Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor, who's arguing with Rab Masya ben Chorosh, and says this part about Yidden. He says the Yidden, of course, they had mitzvahs. The problem was they were also seeped in Avodah Zarah, and therefore they're being told to remove themselves from Avodah Zarah and take the sheep of mitzvah. The question is, why is Rashi bringing it as one long continuation and not as if it's 2 opinions in 2 different pirushim as they appear in their original? And here we also see something amazing that Rebbe says that we spoke about many times. Rashi only brings the name of who said something when it's relevant for understanding the pirush. Now here, for the first part of the pirush, Rashi brought Rab Masya ben Chorosh, but later in the second part, he just continues it in one flow and doesn't even mention that this is being said by someone else, by Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor. So we need to understand what's being added over here by saying Rab Masya ben Chorosh said it, and also what's this expression, Hoyer Rab Masya ben Chorosh? I mean, it sounds like he was always saying this. What's that all about? So the explanation, says the Rebbe, is, as we said before, in the words of Rab Masya ben Chorosh, the fact that the Yidden are naked of mitzvahs, and Hashem is giving them these 2 mitzvahs, as we said before, if we look at it simply, there is no answer for the fact of why they're taking it 4 days in advance. The answer to that is actually in the end words of Rashi. This last point that we mentioned, that the Yidden were seeped in Avodah Zarah, and they're being told to remove themselves from the Avodah Zarah and to take a sheep of mitzvah. In other words, it's specifically by taking this sheep, and specifically 4 days in advance, that's what's going to really remove them and from being completely involved in Avodah Zarah. But in order to understand this and to understand the connection, this is what Rashi first starts off with the words of Rab Masya ben Chorosh, that the Yidden were naked of mitzvahs at the time, and they're being given these 2 mitzvahs. And why 2 mitzvahs? Why not less? Why not more? And this is really what's going on over here. And this is what Rashi is trying to explain in the name of Rab Masya ben Chorosh. Yidden were at that point, they were lacking in a double way. Number one, they're lacking in Asay Toiv, in the positive, in doing mitzvahs. And if that's the case, they can't approach receiving the Torah in that way, missing schusim, missing merits. But they also have an issue and a problem with Sur Meirav, staying away of bad, staying away of evil and klipa. In other words, the bad of Mitzrayim, the klipa of Mitzrayim was stuck to them in a sense that even if they go out of Mitzrayim, how is that going to help? Even if they have some mitzvahs, if they still have evil connected to them, absorbed inside of them, because they were so seeped in Avodah Zarah. And this is why they're being given these two mitzvahs. The mitzvah of Milah, which is going to achieve the Asay Tov, the positive, because they're making a bris, a covenant with Hashem, an everlasting covenant. But Pesach is going to be to affect the Sur Meirah, to remove them completely from their involvement with Avodah Zarah. In other words, just to clarify, not the way we thought originally, or the way we think originally, that Pesach is more about the positive mitzvah of eating the carbon Pesach and so on, but rather it's more about going to be removing them from Avodah Zarah, as we'll soon see. And this is what Rashi is connecting the words of Rab Masya ben Chorosh about these two mitzvahs with the end bit about being seeped in Avodah Zarah, as we'll explain now. So how does Korban Pesach actually achieve this? Now remember, Avodah Zarah is the sheep, the lamb was the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. So by Yidden going out and slaughtering the sheep, this is really, in a certain sense, killing off or removing themselves from the Avodah Zarah. But that's not enough. It needs to take 4 days. They need to be preparing for this for 4 days, taking the sheep in advance 4 days. Because if we just go ahead and slaughter the Avodah Zarah, so that's all very nice. So we, in a certain sense, we nullified it, but that's only to a certain degree. They didn't really remove themselves and uproot their connection to the Avodah Zarah absolutely and completely. This takes preparation, this takes time. And the Rebbe explains it takes 4 days for them, as they're preparing 4 days for slaughtering the sheep of Avodah Zarah. Now you could say, they really got the message. They really removed themselves from the Avodah Zarah, not just a one-off slaughtering of the Avodah Zarah. And the Rebbe compares this to something we would have learned already by Avraham Avinu and the Akedah. Hashem tells Avraham Avinu to bring his son for a korban. The next day, Avraham Avinu journeys out. He's journeying for 3 days. And on the third day, which means 4 days from when he's told by Hashem to take his son to the Akedah, that's when Hashem finally shows him the place. And as Rashi explains, so that it shouldn't be as if he acted impulsively and people should say, Avraham Avinu was taken by surprise and that's why he shechted. No, Avraham Avinu had enough time to think about it and yet he made that decision. In a similar way over here, it's 4 days of preparation, just like by Avraham Avinu, for the Yidden to really be preparing themselves, removing themselves from the Avodah Zarah. Yes, we're going to slaughter that Avodah Zarah. Says the Rebbe, in order for the Ben Chamish Lemikra to appreciate even more this idea that the Yidden needed an Avodah in order to be able to go out of Mitzrayim, even though they had the promise of Hashem already to leave Mitzrayim, Rashi brings who is the one that said this, Rab Masya ben Chorosh. And he would say it in a regular way, meaning to say this is something that he constantly told his Talmidim. How does this all connect? The Gemara tells us that Rab Masya ben Chorosh's yeshiva was in Rome. There were plenty of other yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, but the biggest yeshiva of the time was in Rome, led by Rab Masya ben Chorosh. Why do we need a yeshiva in Rome? Why not just be in Eretz Yisrael? So Rab Masya ben Chorosh would constantly give this message to his Talmidim, that the Geula is dependent on taking a place like Rome, and a situation like Rome, and people that are in a Rome sort of atmosphere, people that are not so connected to Torah and mitzvahs, and yet bring them to be part of the yeshiva, for them to be also ready for the Geula. In other words, this is why his yeshiva is in Rome, to help these kind of Yidden, that they too should be able to be zoichet to the Geula like the Yidden in Mitzrayim. Says the Rebbe, this is what it means, that the whole point that Rab Masya ben Chorosh is saying this constantly, this is his involvement with these kind of Yidden, like the time of Mitzrayim, that they too should have mitzvahs to be able to merit the Geula. And the Rebbe says, the Hoirah to our time, is that, the Yidden are also arguing, we're in Geula so long, what's going on? Hashem promised the Geula, but Hashem wants that we shouldn't be naked of mitzvahs, we should have those chusim with which to go to the Geula. And the Rebbe makes the connection to Yud Shvat. The Istalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe was on Shabbos, Yud Shvat. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is also similar to Rab Masya ben Chorosh, like in a place of Rome, coming to America, coming to New York, coming to a place where there's lots of negativity going on in a certain sense. But it's all in order to be involved with these type of Yidden, that Yidden shouldn't remain naked, like Rab Masya ben Chorosh says. The Yidden shouldn't be naked without tzitzis, without tefillin, as the Frierdiker Rebbe points out in a Sikha. Because this Geula is going to be in a way that no Yid will remain in Golus. And therefore we need to find every single Yid that he should at least have one mitzvah, because that's what the Geula is dependent on. And by us following in his paths, forever and ever we will be poyel akitzu v'ran and sheikh neyafer v'u b'soichem bringing about tchias hamesim and the geula b'meher of yameinu mamish.